The office was dead silent except for the clacking of keyboards and my own heavy sighs, echoing the late hours. That's when I heard it. A laugh. Not just any laugh, but one that seemed to cut through the monotonous drone of overtime like a lifeline. I looked up from my desk, my eyes searching for the source. It was Alex, the new hire, surrounded by a few colleagues who seemed just as enchanted by his charisma. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike, my husband, sending his usual good night wishes. I typed a quick love you back, my mind still on the laughter that felt like a jolt of electricity in the all-too-serene office air. The next day, as I fumbled with the coffee machine, trying to coax it into giving me my much-needed dose of caffeine, Alex appeared beside me. "Trouble with the machine?" he asked, a playful note in his voice. "Just the usual morning battle," I replied, managing a smile. Then it happened. The coffee machine sputtered, sending latte splashing all over the counter and, embarrassingly, on my hand. Alex laughed, that infectious sound again, and I couldn't help but join in. "Let me get you a new one," he offered, and I nodded, thinking nothing of it. Just friendly office camaraderie, right? Lunchtime rolled around, and a group from the office decided to hit the new bistro down the street. Alex ended up sitting next to me, and somehow we landed on the topic of music. Indie music, to be precise. Our shared passion was surprising, and as the conversation flowed, I found myself ignoring a call from Mike. I'd just tell him the bistro was too loud, I reasoned, pushing away a twinge of guilt. Coming home that night to a sleeping Mike, I noticed his missed call again. The guilt sharpened, but I quickly shoved it aside. It was just a missed call, after all, nothing to worry about. But then, the text with Alex started. What began as work-related chats soon veered into the territory of shared jokes, music recommendations, and even personal anecdotes. I found myself deleting the messages, not because I had anything to hide, but to keep my phone organized, I told myself. It was at a work dinner when I realized the extent of my fascination with Alex. We talked non-stop, barely noticing anyone else around us. His stories of spontaneous road trips and music festivals painted him in a light so different from Mike's steady, predictable nature. The comparison sent a thrill through me, one I wasn't sure I wanted to examine too closely. Then came my birthday, and with it, a gift from Alex. A vintage vinyl from one of my favorite indie bands. It was thoughtful, personal, and something Mike would never think to give me. Hiding it felt like a betrayal, yet the thought of explaining it to Mike filled me with unease. He wouldn't understand, I convinced myself. Each of these moments, seemingly small and inconsequential, wove a thread of excitement and doubt through my life. The late-night laughs, the spilled coffee, the shared interests, they all added up, tipping the scales toward a path I never intended to take. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Mike's steady breathing, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of something irreversible. The thrill of new connections, the guilt of secrecy, and the comfort of my marriage with Mike blended into a confusing mix of emotions. Yet the pull of this new flame, Alex, was undeniable, even as I questioned what it meant for my future. The phone buzzed against the silent backdrop of our bedroom, slicing through the stillness like a knife. It was Alex, and though a part of me screamed it was too late for any decent conversation, curiosity won. Mike, deep in sleep beside me, remained undisturbed as I tiptoed out, answering the call with a whispered, "Hey, everything okay?" Alex's voice, laced with frustration over a derailed project, filled the dark hallway. I needed someone to talk to," he admitted, and somehow, that vulnerability tugged at me. We talked, 1 hour blending into the next, and as I finally clicked the end call button, the dawn was creeping in. A connection had been forged in those quiet hours, one that left me questioning the solidity of my feelings for Mike. The next day, the lie slipped out almost too easily. "Work swamped. I'll be late tonight," I texted Mike, ignoring the twinge of guilt. The thrill of sneaking around to meet Alex for drinks felt like a jolt of electricity, breathing life into a part of me I hadn't realized was dormant. Our meetings grew more frequent, and with each secret encounter, I found myself drifting further from Mike, and deeper into what I was starting to accept as an emotional affair with Alex. Mike's love is strong, I reassured myself, clinging to the belief that our bond could withstand my newfound connection. But then, one night, everything changed. The air between Alex and I, charged with unspoken tension, finally sparked into a kiss that felt inevitable. As I pulled away, the reality of what had happened hit me. It's just a one-time mistake, I rationalized, but the line I had crossed was clear, and there was no turning back. The affair escalated quickly after that. Each stolen moment with Alex was a mix of exhilaration and guilt. I convinced myself I could juggle both relationships, that the thrill of being with Alex didn't diminish what I had with Mike, but the balance was precarious. Then came the close call. A message from Alex popped up just as Mike glanced at my phone. My heart stopped, but I laughed it off, managing to divert his attention. The risk of our secret being discovered was becoming all too real, and yet, I couldn't bring myself to end things. Guilt began to gnaw at me, especially in moments when Mike looked at me with unwavering trust. Am I making a mistake? The question lingered, but every time I looked into Alex's eyes filled with passion and promise, I pushed my doubts aside. The obsession with what Alex and I shared clouded my judgment, silencing the voice inside me that knew this path could only lead to ruin. The moment my phone lit up with another message from Alex, I felt the now familiar surge of adrenaline. But this time it was chased by a pang of dread that I couldn't shake off. I glanced at Mike, sleeping soundly beside me, and slipped out of bed to take the call in the privacy of our bathroom. Hey, we need to be careful, I whispered into the phone, the urgency in my voice a reflection of the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. Alex's response was lighthearted, a stark contrast to my growing unease. Why? The thrill is part of the fun, isn't it? He teased, but I wasn't in the mood for jokes. The next day, my friend Jenna caught me off guard. You're playing with fire, she said over coffee, her gaze piercing. I've noticed how distant you've become. What's going on? I brushed her off with a laugh that sounded more hollow than I intended. You're imagining things, I lied, feeling the weight of my deceit heavier than ever. The lies started piling up, each one more elaborate than the last. Work trips, late meetings, sudden emergencies. I spun them all, trapping myself in a web of my own making. Each lie was a brick in the barrier I was building between Mike and me, and with every word, I felt more lost. Mike's suspicion was inevitable. One evening, he looked at me with a mix of confusion and hurt in his eyes. Is there someone else? He asked, the directness of the question cutting through me like a knife. No, of course not, I lied, forcing indignation into my voice. But inside, I was reeling, hurt by his lack of trust, and terrified that he might see through my facade. Alex and I grew reckless, our secret meetings becoming more daring, more public. The risk of being caught added an intoxicating edge to our affair, blinding us to the consequences. Then came the day Mike found a hotel receipt in my jacket. The hurt in his eyes was a physical blow, and I scrambled for an explanation, claiming it was for a surprise getaway for us. The lie tasted bitter, a stark reminder of the distance between the truth and the reality I was living. I confronted Alex, asking him to dial back, to be more careful, but his attachment had grown, and he pushed for more. Leave him, he urged, but I was paralyzed, caught between the rush of new affection and the deep, enduring bond one had with Mike. Mike's investigation into my stories was thorough, his actions driven by a desperation I hadn't seen in him before. He checked my phone bill, and the repeated calls to the same number were a damning evidence I couldn't explain away. Each step of the way, I was losing myself, my moral compass spinning out of control. The realization that I was not only risking my marriage, but also my sense of self struck me with chilling clarity. The fabric of lies I had woven was unraveling, and I was left to face the consequences of my actions, trapped in a maze of my own making, desperately searching for a way out. The night air was thick with unease, the kind that clings to your skin and burrows into your heart. As I stood at the crossroads of my life, phone in hand, Alex's voice was clear, decisive, cutting through the silence like a verdict. I can't do this anymore, he said, his ultimatum hanging between us like a guillotine. It's me or him. My heart pounded against my chest, a prisoner wanting to escape. The choice should have been simple, but indecision paralyzed me. Mike's silence in the following days was a chasm growing wider with each passing moment. His once warm glances turned cold, his laughter replaced by an echoing quiet that spoke volumes. I knew he sensed the shift in the tides, a storm brewing on the horizon, yet neither of us dared to speak its name. Then, in a heated moment of careless frustration, Alex's name slipped from my lips like a traitor. The room went still, the air sucked out, leaving nothing but the weight of my mistake. Mike's face, a mask of stoicism, cracked, the hurt and betrayal bleeding through. He had suspected, maybe even known, but hearing his fears spoken aloud was a blow I couldn't take back. The confrontation was inevitable, a collision course set from the moment I chose secrecy over honesty. Mike laid out the evidence he had collected, a mosaic of lies and deceit, the hotel receipt, the late-night calls, the whispered secrets. I stood there, a defendant in the court of his heart, guilty as charged. His eyes, once filled with love, now bore into me with a pain so raw it threatened to tear me apart. "How could you?" he asked, a simple question that unraveled me. I begged for forgiveness, for a chance to mend the tapestry of our life together that I had so recklessly torn. But as the words fell from my lips, they felt hollow, too little too late. Mike's silence was a gavel falling, sentencing me to the reality of my actions. Leaving our home was like walking through a dream, each step heavy with the gravity of my choices. The finality of packing a bag, of closing the door behind me was a chapter ending. I sought refuge in Alex's arms, but the sanctuary I hoped to find was a mirage. The excitement that once fueled our secret rendezvous had evaporated, leaving behind the bitter taste of reality. Alex's admission was the cruel twist of the knife. "I'm not ready for this," he confessed, his words a reflection of the truth I had refused to see. The chase, the thrill of the forbidden, was all it had been for him. And there I was, caught in the aftermath of a storm of my own making. My heart a casualty of a war I never should have started. The realization hit me then, a sobering clarity amidst the chaos. I had gambled everything for a mirage, losing myself, losing Mike, in the pursuit of a happiness that was never meant to be mine. As I stood there amidst the ruins of my life, the weight of my choices settled around me like a shroud, a reminder of the cost of chasing shadows. The phone's glare pierced the darkness of our bedroom, a silent herald to the chaos that was about to unfold. "Hey, it's me." Alex's voice was a lifeline, pulling me from the edge of sleep at an hour when the world whispered secrets meant to stay hidden. We talked until the night bled into dawn, a conversation that felt like a revelation. I lay there, Mike's steady breathing a contrast to the storm raging in my heart, wondering how a connection forged in the quiet hours could feel more real than anything I'd shared with my husband in months. The first lie slipped out easier than I expected. "Mike, I'm swamped at work. Don't wait up," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor of excitement at the thought of seeing Alex again. The guilt was there, a shadow at the edge of my joy, but it was easy to ignore when the thrill of secrecy felt like being alive again. Our meetings grew from occasional drinks to regular confessions of our deepest fears and desires. With every shared secret, I felt myself slipping further from Mike and deeper into this emotional abyss with Alex. I convinced myself that Mike's love was strong enough to weather my need for something more, something that sparked a light in parts of me I'd forgotten existed. Then came the kiss. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness fueled by too many drinks and too much longing, but it felt like crossing an invisible line from which there was no return. I justified it as a one-off, a slip, but the lie tasted bitter on my tongue. The affair became physical, a secret dance of longing and guilt. I was torn between the exhilarating rush of new love and the steady warmth of the life I'd built with Mike. I told myself I could keep both, balance them on the edge of a knife without ever having to choose. But the close call with Mike, the almost discovery of a text from Alex, jolted me awake. The risk of losing everything became real, tangible in the way Mike's eyes narrowed, not quite believing my hasty lies. The trust that had been the bedrock of our marriage was cracking, and I was the one wielding the hammer. Guilt began to gnaw at me, relentless reminder of the betrayal hidden behind my smile. Mike's trustful eyes haunted me, whispering questions of what I was becoming, what we were losing, yet the obsession with Alex, the intoxicating rush of our stolen moments, pushed those doubts aside, drowning them in a sea of justification and desire. The narrative unspooled with the inevitability of a Greek tragedy, each lie, each secret rendezvous a step closer to the precipice. Friends' warnings were brushed aside, their concern of background noise drowned out by the siren call of my own selfishness. The web of lies grew, intricate and suffocating as I fabricated work trips and late meetings, a desperate attempt to cling to the fragments of two worlds colliding in slow motion. Suspicion darkened Mike's eyes, the unspoken questions between us growing heavier with each passing day. This direct confrontation shattered the fragile illusion I'd constructed, the lie dying on my lips as I saw the trust we'd built erode in real time. The thrill of risk that had once fueled our recklessness turned to ash, the danger of discovery no longer exciting but terrifyingly real. When evidence of my betrayal surfaced, the look in Mike's eyes was a wound deeper than any words could inflict. My attempts to lie, to weave a story around the damning receipt, felt hollow, the final nails in the coffin of our marriage. Confronted by Alex, the reality of our situation became undeniably clear. His demands, the ultimatum, left me reeling, caught between the ruins of my marriage and the mirage of a future with him. But as the confrontation with Mike laid bare the depth of my betrayal, the choice I'd been avoiding crystallized in the harsh light of truth. Begging for forgiveness, I saw the gulf between us, a chasm widened by my own actions. Mike's silence was a verdict more crushing than any argument, a wordless goodbye to the life we'd shared. Leaving home, my heart a cacophony of loss and regret, I sought refuge in the arms of the man for whom I'd risked everything. But the allure had faded, the reality of our situation settling in like a cold dawn. Alex's change of heart, the admission that the chase had been the thrill, left me adrift in a sea of my own making, isolated, rejected, and adrift. The consequences of my actions unfolded in a relentless tide. Friends and family, once pillars of my world, became distant shores, their disappointment a reflection of my own self-loathing. Attempts to reconnect with Mike were met with silence, a door firmly closed on the possibility of redemption. The professional fallout was swift, my job a battlefield where whispers and judgment followed me like shadows. Financial strain and social isolation became constant companions. The price of my choices measured in the currency of lost friendships and strained smiles. Depression settled in, a fog that colored every moment with the hue of regret. The life I'd once taken for granted, the love I'd betrayed, became specters haunting the edges of my waking thoughts. And when word reached me of Alex's new relationship, the finality of my isolation was complete. The journey from betrayal to consequence was a path paved with loss, a lesson learned in the harshest of terms about the cost of choices, in the price of chasing shadows at the expense of the light. In the blink of an eye, my life transformed from a shared journey with Mike into a solitary path, marked by the heavy steps of regret in the shadow of my own choices. There was no going back, no undoing the hurt. The only way out was through, facing the consequences head-on, no matter how daunting they seemed. Mom, Dad, I messed up big time. I confessed over the phone, the weight of my words heavy in the silence that followed. Their disappointment was palpable, a tangible thing that squeezed my heart, yet their love was unwavering. You can come home, my dad's voice cracked, a testament to the pain and support mingled in his words. They didn't condone my actions, but they stood by me, a lighthouse in the storm that had become my life. Mike's decision to file for divorce felt like a physical blow, each document a stark reminder of the love we once shared, now irreparably fractured. Signing my name on the dotted line was akin to closing the book on a chapter of my life I'd never wanted to end. The finality of it left me breathless, adrift in a sea of what-ifs and if-onlys. The process of moving out was a slow torture, each item I packed away a memory, a shared moment, a piece of a life I had taken for granted and ultimately destroyed. The empty shelves, the bare walls, they all whispered of a happiness that was no more. Seeking therapy was a step towards healing, a way to sift through the wreckage of my choices and understand the why behind them. It was in those sessions, in the safety of the therapist's office, that I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my guilt, to confront the pain I'd caused Mike, and to begin the slow process of forgiving myself. The fallout at work was swift and merciless. Rumors and whispered judgments followed me until the day I was let go, a casualty of a scandal of my own making. The professional respect I had worked so hard to build crumbled to dust, leaving me to face the daunting task of starting over. Starting over meant moving to a new city, taking a job that paid a fraction of my previous salary, but it was a chance to rebuild, to prove to myself, if no one else, that I could rise from the ashes of my past mistakes. The work was hard, the days long and filled with challenges, but it was honest, a step towards redemption. Yet it was the nights that proved the hardest to endure. Alone in my small apartment, the silence was a constant reminder of the life and love I had lost. Memories of Mike, of our time together haunted me, a ghostly presence that filled the space with echoes of laughter and whispered promises now broken. The depth of my mistake, the realization of the pain I had caused settled around me like a shroud, a constant companion in my solitude. Through the pain, the loss, and the loneliness, I clung to the hope that this was not the end of my story, but a difficult chapter on the path to finding myself again. The road to redemption was long, paved with hard truths and harder lessons, but it was a road I was determined to walk, one step at a time, towards a future where I could look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back at me. The moment I stepped into the therapist's office, it felt like I was finally facing the music, loud, discordant, and impossible to ignore. I'm here because I've made a series of choices that hurt the people I love, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But in that space, it echoed like a shout. The divorce papers arrived like a delayed echo of my own failings. Signing them was surreal, each strokes of the pen a reminder of the love I'd squandered. The finality of it was a cold splash of reality. Mike and I were done, and there was no undoing the damage I'd caused. In the aftermath, I clung to the shards of my shattered life, each piece a lesson in pain and consequence. I'll never let myself hurt someone like that again, I promised into the emptiness of my apartment, a vow to myself more than anyone else. My steps forward were tentative, each one a battle against the tide of memories and regrets. I started a journal, pouring my thoughts and lessons onto the pages, a tangible record of my journey from betrayal to self-awareness. The path was lonely, every step a reminder of the life I'd upended. But with each day, I grew a little stronger, a little more resolute. Hearing about Mike's new relationship was like reopening a wound I thought had begun to heal. The news came through the grapevine, an offhand comment that felt like a punch to the gut. He's moved on, they said, and I realized the depth of my loss. Mike's happiness was a bittersweet reminder of the love we once shared, now just a memory tarnished by my actions. Rebuilding bridges with friends and family was like navigating a minefield of distrust and disappointment. "I'm sorry," became my mantra, a phrase I offered freely but knew would take time to truly be accepted. Trust, once broken, demanded more than words to mend. Acceptance was a bitter pill, each swallow a step towards acknowledging the role I played in my own downfall. "This is on me," I confessed in therapy, the words a heavy but necessary admission. Acceptance didn't dull the pain, but it offered a starting point for forgiveness. "Okay, so the last time I talked to you, I told you about this whole mess with X. You know, my husband's best friend? Yeah, the whole thing started at this party. We'd been drinking. Everyone was looser than usual. And I guess after all those years of just knowing each other as friends, something clicked. I mean, I'd always thought he was kind of cute, but nothing ever happened, until that night. Suddenly we're talking for hours, like, really talking about stuff deeper than just the weather or whatever we chat about normally. Things got, well, intense. I felt this connection, and it probably didn't help that he'd had a couple too many as well. The next thing I know, we're kissing. It was crazy, wrong, and kind of thrilling all at the same time. The guilt started hitting me the second it was over, but that feeling of being wanted, of being alive again after so long, it hooked me. I tried, trust me, to just walk away from it all the next day, pretend it never happened. But every time I saw X, That feeling, that jolt, would come back. We started texting, little check-ins, jokes, then it became, more. Flirting, hinting at stuff. Before I knew it, we were meeting up when my husband wasn't around. I swear, I still can't believe I did this. But it felt so damn good to be wanted like that. To have this spark again that had been missing in my marriage for a while. It was all stolen moments, a rush of being reckless and alive. And totally messed up. I don't even know what I was thinking, except that I needed something to make me feel less stuck, less like I was just going through the motions of life. It's pathetic, right? Sacrificing everything just for a few moments of excitement when I could have been working on things with my husband. But something in me just snapped. Things spiraled out of control after that party. It started with little secret meetings, a coffee run while my husband was at work, sneaking out to grab lunch together. The rush of trying to hide it all. It was kind of thrilling at first, in a twisted way. Soon it wasn't enough. We'd find excuses to ditch events, so we could steal an hour or two alone. We had this whole system. Coded texts, burner phones for messages we couldn't risk being found. It was insane. Looking back, I was acting like a character in a bad spy movie. The lies got bigger, the sneaking around more elaborate, changing clothes in the car so my husband wouldn't smell a different perfume. It was exhausting and exhilarating all at once. But whenever I'd see X, all that adrenaline, that forbidden feeling, it was like this drug I couldn't get enough of. The worst part was that I still loved my husband. It wasn't like I wanted to leave him, or hurt him, but X made me feel something I hadn't in years. He said things no one else did, noticed things, made me feel wanted again. I knew it was dumb, superficial probably, but the truth was, my marriage had gotten so comfortable, so routine. With X, it was always this passionate edge, this dangerous feeling. And the guilt. Oh, the guilt. It was crushing. My husband would come home and be his sweet, clueless self, and I'd want to scream. You seem distant lately, he'd say over dinner, his brow furrowing slightly. I'd mumble something about work, stress, anything to avoid looking him in the eye. Nights were the hardest. Lying in bed next to him, knowing I'd just been with X a few hours earlier, it tore me apart inside. There were times I'd cry myself to sleep, hating what I was doing, hating myself. But then I'd get a text from X, some inside joke, a flirty comment, or even just a check-in, and all that resolve would vanish. I tried, I swear, to break things off with X a few times. Told him it was wrong. We needed to just stop. He'd get quiet. This sadness would come over him. And then, well, he'd say something like, I can't lose you, or, I miss you already. And that would be it. The cycle would start over, fueled by guilt and this desperate, addictive passion. I was a total mess, spiraling deeper into this toxic thing I couldn't seem to escape. You wouldn't believe the lengths I went to keep this whole affair under wraps. My lies got more tangled, like a whole damn spider web I'd woven around myself. It was work trips that were actually weekends with X, fake errands, or suddenly having to help out a friend. Every time I lied, I swore it would be the last time. But of course, it never was. The worst part was lying to my friends. They'd mention stuff casually like, oh, you guys missed that double date? Bummer. And I'd have to play dumb, pretending I didn't even know it happened. It felt slimy, like this whole other version of me had started to creep in and take over. My phone was a ticking time bomb, changing passwords constantly, deleting whole conversations. The paranoia was maddening. One wrong move. One time I forgot to switch out of a burner account, or left a text open, and it would all be over. The stress was eating me alive. Every phone notification made me jump. Every casual glance my husband threw at me made me sweat. X and I try to be super careful, mostly meeting in out-of-the-way places, never where we might run into anyone we knew. Even then, I was always on edge. My heart would race the whole time, imagining someone spotting us, the questions, the fallout. I started having panic attacks, sometimes out of nowhere. And then, with him, even the passion started feeling tainted by this awful dread and shame. The whole thing started to unravel. I'd snap at my husband for no reason, withdrawing, shutting down. He just looked confused and hurt. X didn't get it either. What's wrong? Are you getting cold feet? He'd ask, and I'd want to scream. No, I'm getting a conscience. One night I broke down, sobbing on the bathroom floor, mascara running. I wanted to tell my husband everything, to beg for forgiveness. But the words wouldn't come. What would I even say? I was still seeing X, even while I swore to myself I'd end it. I was pathetic and cowardly, and I felt trapped in a nightmare of my own making. I couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the guilt, the constant fear of being caught. It was a vice squeezing the life out of me. I remember the day I finally told X I loved him. It just blurted out at this dingy motel we always used. The look on his face, it wasn't some grand, romantic moment. He seemed shocked, maybe even a little scared. I think that's when things started to shift. Me saying it out loud made it feel real and terrifying. I loved him, yes, but I still loved my husband. Not in the same all-consuming way X made me feel, but it was real love, built on years of shared history, a life together. I wanted the both of them, which was stupid, impossible, and deeply messed up. I expected X to tell me he loved me back. That would solve everything, right? If he'd just say those words, we could leave it all behind, make a run for it. Whatever crazy fantasy I'd concocted in my head to justify my actions. But he didn't. He looked away, mumbled something about it being complicated, that he didn't want to hurt me. That's the thing about X. He'd always give you just enough to hang on to. A hint of a deeper feeling, a look, some half-confession, but never enough to actually take a risk. He wouldn't commit. It was always open-ended, unfinished. It was as if he enjoyed the thrill of the forbidden, but didn't want the messiness of actual consequences. He'd say things like, I don't know what I'd do without you, or, I wish things were different. And for a while, those vague crumbs of affection were enough. But when I finally pushed him, demanded some honesty instead of his usual evasiveness. Crickets. It was always about him, keeping him comfortable enough to maintain the status quo, but not enough to upset the balance and risk actually losing me. Deep down, I always knew this. But after I said that L word, it became impossible to keep ignoring. I'd never felt more used, more manipulated in my life. The worst part is, even then, even seeing how cowardly he was, I couldn't walk away. It was this twisted addiction, this broken version of love I couldn't let go of. The frustration ate me alive. We'd have these fights, where I'd beg him to be honest, to tell me if he ever saw a future with me, or if I was just his dirty little secret to escape the boredom of his everyday life. He'd shut down, go silent, and a day later we'd be back where we started, locked in this maddening dance of desire and disappointment. It was pure emotional torture, and I just kept taking it, letting him chip away at my self-respect until there was almost nothing left. Things reached a breaking point. I couldn't live like that anymore. One foot in my marriage, the other in a crumbling fantasy with a guy who wouldn't even love me back. One night after I just lay there staring at the ceiling. He was already snoring, oblivious to the internal war one was waging. I made up my mind right then. The next day, I met him for coffee. No burner phones or disguises this time. I told him, point blank, I can't do this anymore. Tell me you love me, or it's over. No more games. His face went white. That familiar look of panic flickered across his eyes. I refused to let him weasel out of it this time. A long, awkward silence passed. Finally, he spoke. I care about you. A lot. But I can't just abandon my life. And I don't know if I'm in love with you. I think I could be, maybe, if the circumstances were different. Okay, that wasn't the grand declaration I'd secretly hoped for, but at least it was something. Then the kicker. And I'm hurting you. I don't want to be the guy who destroys your marriage. This is wrong. Honestly, I was shocked. 2 years of lies, and he suddenly gets a moral compass? Part of me wanted to call his bluff, to scream about how he was the one who dragged me into this, that he was a coward for not facing the consequences of his own actions. But something else twisted in my gut, a mix of relief and a strange sense of pride. He realized he was crap, and even that small acknowledgement meant something. It's not about destroying my marriage, I said, my voice shaking a little. It's about me destroying myself. This whole thing. I trailed off, unable to find the words. I have to choose me. It felt monumental saying it, even though I knew it was what I needed to do. I knew he wanted answers, some sort of closure, but I couldn't give him that. I left him sitting at that little cafe table and just walked away. It wasn't some dramatic walk into the sunset kind of moment. I actually felt numb. I went home, packed a bag, and told my husband I needed some space. I didn't confess, couldn't bear to. Not yet. I just said things weren't working, that I needed time to figure things out. He was hurt, confused, but agreed to give me the space. It was the hardest, most selfish thing I'd ever done. I wasn't innocent, knew the mess I'd caused. But I also knew staying in either relationship would have suffocated me completely. I had to walk away from both men, not to be with someone new, but to try to find a way back to myself, to salvage whatever dignity I had left. The numbness wore off, and the shame hit like a freight train. I'd always prided myself on being a good person, or at least trying to be. Now, I looked in the mirror and saw a liar, a cheat, a homewrecker. Hiding out in some cheap apartment I could barely afford felt like a punishment I deserved. My husband kept calling, sending texts. At first, they were the sweet, concerned kind. Are you okay? Do you need me to come get you? We can work this out. Then they shifted, hints of frustration and suspicion slipping through. What the hell is really going on? What aren't you telling me? I couldn't take it anymore. I invited him to meet me at a park, thinking it'd be some semi-neutral ground. It was a disaster. I blurted it all out. The affair with X, the lies, everything. He went quiet first, like that calm before a hurricane. Then came the rage. I'd never seen him like that. His face contorted in disgust and betrayal. How could you? He choked out. All these years, all the promises, everything we built. You threw it away for what? A fling? I tried to apologize, but the words felt pathetic. I love you, I swear. But my voice trailed off. I couldn't even explain it to myself, let alone him. I didn't deserve his forgiveness, but I desperately wanted it. Don't you dare say that, he spat back. You don't get to say you love me after this. I drove home alone. The apartment didn't feel like a refuge anymore, just a stark reminder of the life I'd blown up. I wanted to reach out to X, to blame him somehow, but what was the point? I made my choices. I had to face them. A few days later, I got a text from X, short, cowardly, even for him. I'm so sorry about your husband. I never wanted this to happen. I hope you can find a way to fix things. No. I love you. No offer to help carry the burden, just more self-preservation. I threw my phone against the wall, wishing I could break it into a million pieces the same way I had shattered my world. Weeks passed in a blur of tears, frozen dinners, and sleepless nights. My husband initiated the divorce, clean, impersonal, finalized with a speed that ripped another hole in my heart. I had no claim to anything, no reason to fight it. The guilt wasn't a sharp pain anymore. It became this dull ache, a constant reminder of the wreckage I'd left behind. Sometimes I'd wonder what X was doing, if he missed me, if he regretted it now. Then I'd force myself to stop. It didn't matter. He was a ghost, a bad decision made in a weak moment, nothing more. I knew I couldn't let myself become one of those bitter, angry divorcees. Pathetic, clinging to the past. My therapist, yes, I finally caved and got one, was all about radical self-acceptance. I hated those words at first, thought they were just psychobabble. How the hell was I supposed to accept blowing up my life? But slowly, bit by bit, I began to understand. Acceptance didn't mean condoning what I did, but it meant owning the consequences and not wasting what was left of my life wallowing in shame. Easier said than done, let me tell you. Some nights I'd cry myself to sleep, reliving every stupid choice I'd made. Other days, I'd get sparks of hope, of determination to pick up the pieces and build a life that wasn't defined by regret. I reached out to my husband, not some grand plea to take me back, but an apology, a real one. I told him, over the phone because I couldn't face him, that I was sorry. Sorry for betraying him, for hurting him, for being a selfish idiot who had never appreciated what she had until it was gone. It felt like ripping off a bandage, but also, weirdly freeing. He didn't forgive me, he said, maybe someday. But right now the hurt was too raw. I didn't expect him to. I told him about the therapy, about trying to understand what led me to that point so I could make sure it never happened again. I guess he was surprised. It wasn't some magic fix, but it was a start at rebuilding some trust, at least as friends. Living alone was an adjustment. I learned to cook halfway decent meals, kept busy with cleaning, work, anything to stay out of my own head. Some nights the loneliness felt crushing. I'd think about texting X, the familiar ache returning, but I'd type a message, stare at it, and then hit delete. It was tempting to fall back into old patterns, to reach out to him. But that wasn't growth, it was just running away again. Instead, I started going for walks in the evenings, joining a book club, reconnecting with old friends I'd neglected. I forced myself to be present, to engage with the world even when it felt scary and lonely. Some days sucked, others held glimmers of potential. It wasn't straight line of progress, it was messy and slow. But those small choices, to face the past, to try doing things on my own, it started to make me feel like a person again, not just a broken, leftover thing. I know this is going to sound cheesy, but sometimes things happen when you least expect them. I was at the grocery store, of all places, when I bumped into this guy in the produce aisle. Literally bumped into, like our carts collided, sending apples rolling everywhere. We both apologized, laughed a bit, and you know what? There was a spark. Now, I wasn't looking for anything. Hell, the thought of risking my heart again terrified me. But we ended up chatting. His name was Mark. Turns out we lived in the same neighborhood, and he'd just gotten out of a long relationship too. We grabbed a coffee after grocery shopping, a super casual, no pressure thing, and I felt something I hadn't in years, genuine lightness. He wasn't X. He wasn't some thrilling escape from the ordinary. He was kind and real and listened when I talked. I told him right from the start about my divorce, about, well, the whole mess that had been my life. I could have edited that part out, pretended those years didn't exist, but that felt like the old me, the dishonest one. Amazingly, he didn't run for the hills. He said some stuff about everyone making mistakes, about second chances being important. Maybe it was naive, but I felt like he actually meant it. We started seeing each other regularly. Slow, cautious, no big, dramatic promises. Just dinners, walks in the park, getting to know each other without the pressure of needing it to be some epic love story. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. Trust didn't come easy. My heart felt bruised, and my instinct was to guard it at all costs. But with Mark, there were no hidden agendas, no games. I realized how starved I'd been for something simple and real, how exhausting it was always being on edge about someone else's intentions. I learned from my mistakes. Those first sparks with X, they clouded my judgment. With Mark, I took my time. I listened to my gut, which whispered doubts sometimes, but also whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was something different. He wasn't perfect. No one is, but he was honest. And that was worth 10 times the flashy romance I'd craved before. It took a long time, longer than probably most people would consider normal, before I even said the words, "I love you," to Mark. But when I said them, they were real, not some desperate plea to fill a void in myself like they had been with X. I wasn't looking for him to fix me, to save me. I was saving myself, one small, careful step at a time. Sometimes it all comes back in a rush, out of nowhere. I'll remember X, a laugh, a gesture, and the shame hits, the sickening thought of what I threw away. The fear lingers. Will I do it again? Am I that kind of person? The kind who betrays those she loves? Some mornings it's the first thing I think about. Mark is patient, more than I deserve. He tries to understand. But that kind of hurt is impossible to grasp unless you've lived it. It creates distance between us, no matter how much we love each other. But I won't let that darkness win. The worst thing I could do is waste this second chance, this life built on truth, not lies. I look at Mark, at the love and certainty in his eyes, and I'm reminded of how easily I could have lost that. There are good days when the memory of X fades, when I truly believe those mistakes don't define me. My story isn't over just because I messed up. The best apology I can offer is to never stop trying to be a better person. That means honesty, even when it's hard, and never, ever taking the good things in my life for granted. Do I regret the affair? Absolutely. But it forced a brutal kind of awakening. If it hadn't happened, I'd probably be sleepwalking